I don't think we would go as far as saying that even in Kenya, there's actually not enough land to set aside. And that, I think, for somebody who's not in the field, it sounds quite simplistically a solution. But I think, Richard, what might be new for some of us to hear is this idea that setting aside animals is not a sustainable thing, because I think when people are doing that, they're doing it with this idea that that is protecting the animals from humans and that that's a good thing. But you are casting a vision of more of an interaction between these two kind of, I don't know what you would call us, species or groups of species. Tell us what that would look like in real life.
I think a lot of people have evolved in their mind the notion that wildlife is somehow, let's call it biodiversity, have evolved in their mind the notion that somehow wildlife and people are two separate things, and that biodiversity is something that is kind of nice to have, but is not something that is really essential for the well-being of people. Well, that notion is increasingly being challenged, and it's being challenged on the basis of what are referred to as ecosystem services. So what do I mean by ecosystem services? A very simple example would be the services that insects provide to humanity through the pollination of crops. Now that service is in terms of crop production globally is worth many billions of dollars. And there are places now in the world, I'm not talking about Africa, where insect populations have been so reduced that actually the pollination services they provide have been almost entirely removed. As a result of which you have evolving industries of beekeepers who literally have to transport bees from farm to farm in America in order for pollination of crops to take place, because the natural populations of insects as a result of habitat change, use of insecticides, and et cetera, have disappeared. That's just one example of an ecosystem service. So I think the world is beginning to understand the value of that, whereas before we simply used biodiversity as if there was no end and it was for free. In fact, it's not for free, and we have to steward it and we have to look after it. And that leads me on to the next kind of point, which is the globe has now begun to realize that it needs to find a way to, in inverted commas, set aside at least 30% of the surface of the planet to maintain those ecosystem services and those ecological processes that I'm talking about. And I'm talking about fisheries, I'm talking about the marine environment and all that it produces for humans, and et cetera, et cetera. But if you then consider a country like Kenya, right now, the national parks cover an area of sort of 12%, I think it is, maybe even less, of the total land area, total land and marine area. Well, to go from 12% to 30%, which is an agreement that Kenya has, an international agreement that Kenya has signed up to, is not going to happen from the creation of more national parks. That's just politically untenable. It's just never going to happen. So we have to find different methods of getting to that 30% figure without creating national parks. So what does that mean? It means that people are going to have to find a way of living sustainably with nature. And that is what modern conservation is all about. It's not about national parks. A very simple example before I finish. I spent time on Old Pejeta. When I got to Old Pejeta, we used to persecute lions and hyenas because they ate our cattle. In fact, lions were referred to as vermin. We had a big book, and we used to record livestock movement, and if they were killed by lions, it was killed by vermin. We then created and made a conservancy, but we didn't remove the cattle in the process. What we did is we integrated the cattle operation, 7,000 head of cattle, with wildlife. And we ended up with a profitable herd of cattle with some of the biggest populations of lions and other predators in East Africa, all running on the same piece of land. So it demonstrates that it's possible. And in fact, it made the land much more productive and profitable on a per acre basis than it had been before. So those are the kinds of models that I'm talking about. And of course, there's much more that has evolved and many more opportunities in that regard that have evolved since. But that I hope gives you an example of how it is possible to live in harmony with nature. We don't need to separate ourselves from it. We need to find a way of living sustainably with it.